Ils vivent sans électricité, eau courante, téléphone ni voiture. Je parle bien sûr des Amish, une communauté religieuse américaine qui ont choisi de vivre comme au XVIIIe siècle. Mais si vous en avez déjà entendu parler dans des médias ou des documentaires, j'ai voulu aller plus loin pour raconter toute l'histoire de ce mouvement renfermé sur lui-même où personne ne parle. Alors j'ai rencontré une ex-Amish aux États-Unis qui a passé la majorité de sa vie dans cette communauté pour qu'elle éclaire toutes nos questions sur la réalité de ce qui s'y passe. Alors simple mode de vie ou dangereuse secte, c'est la question à laquelle on va répondre aujourd'hui. La population Amish se répartit sur une trentaine d'États des USA, sur 50 au total, et on dénombre plus de 330 000 individus. Une population qui grandit constamment dû au nombre important d'enfants par foyer. Majoritairement, on les retrouve dans les États du nord-est du pays, comme la Pennsylvanie et l'Ohio. Mais le mouvement est originaire d'Allemagne, de Suisse et d'Alsace. Et oui, une partie en Alsace, ça vient de chez nous, finalement.
The Amish are kind of like stuck in the 1800s. It's right around the time the steam engines came out and things started to get really modern and advanced. And they're like, no, this is not God's way. This is not what he would want. We have to keep the rules here and keep things simple. And that's where it all started. But then they started to create all of their own man-made church rules and regulations and how they can dress and things that they can do. And when the cars came out, they said, we can't have cars, we gotta stick with horse and buggy. So they still ride in horse and buggy to this day.
Les Amish apprennent donc l'allemand à l'école et conversent principalement en ce qu'on appelle du Pennsylvanian Dutch, c'est-à-dire du néerlandais pennsylvanien en français ou en anglais selon les groupes. Parce que oui, parmi les Amish, il existe plusieurs groupes avec des règles différentes décidées en commun et avec des niveaux d'austérité plus ou moins élevés selon les communautés.
But there's old order, there's new order. And then there's Swarzentrooper, which is where I'm from. And the Swarzentrooper order is the strictest order that you will ever come across. There is no order that is stricter than that. So they do have correlations between them, but they don't commune with each other in terms of their church.
Les Amish refusent plus ou moins radicalement toute technologie. Si certains ont aujourd'hui l'eau courante et l'électricité, et parfois même acceptent d'utiliser des vélos électriques ou de prendre le taxi pour aller faire quelques courses qui se limitent aux quelques produits qu'ils ne produisent pas eux-mêmes, d'autres refusent encore l'utilisation de papier toilette et préfèrent des morceaux de journaux locaux découpés en petits bouts.
Where I'm from, like, we didn't even have indoor plumbing.
Wow,
There's
okay.
no AC. There's no electricity, nothing. Other orders.
I would have thought that they would have plumbing because that's old enough.
Nope. Yeah, no, we had outhouses, wood burning stoves, and it, like, really, it goes way back, like far back. But old order and new order, they do have indoor plumbing. They have showers, they have their bathrooms inside, and they run gas, some kind of gas pipeline to their buildings, and that's what helps them. And I believe they use some generators as well, and now a lot of them are using solar.
Les entreprises Amish sont très prisées localement car elles sont réputées pour être de très bons fermiers, charpentiers, fabricants de meubles en bois et artisans en tout genre qui utilisent des produits majoritairement locaux et emploient des techniques ancestrales qui, bien que plus chronophages et pénibles, sont gages de qualité et de durabilité.
The way that they build their homes and their furniture, it's very precise. It's very German built stuff, and it's like the best stuff you'll ever get. Like, so you will find, like, if you were to go to the Midwest, to Ohio, to Indiana, to Pennsylvania, you would find a lot of Amish owned construction companies that build homes.
That makes sense.
And furniture. It's the best furniture you'll ever buy. It will last you, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids.
Multiple earthquakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Visant à être le plus autonome possible, les Amish se déplacent en calèches tirées par des chevaux, fabriquent leurs propres habits et consomment majoritairement leurs propres récoltes et produits animaliers issus de leurs animaux ou élevages.
So we grew all our own fruits and vegetables, raised all our own animals. We had a farm, sewed all our own clothes. Whatever clothes we were wearing, we made, unless there were shoes. We didn't make our shoes and boots, we bought those, but those had to be very specific. Did we buy things at the grocery store? Yes, we bought flour, we bought sugar, we bought some oils. Sometimes we buy like cereal and stuff like that, but generally we cook from scratch. Yeah.
So mostly autonomous.
And then how we made money and to be able to provide is we milk cows by hand and sold the milk. And
yeah, there are a couple markets where, you know, general people can go and buy Amish products.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then were very resourceful. Like, we would can fruits and vegetables to sell. We would sell fresh vegetables. Like, we had a huge garden every summer. We had 300 to 400 laying hens. We would sell the eggs, and then if we had too many eggs, then we would make noodles, and we would sell the noodles.
Il est d'ailleurs assez intéressant de noter que suite à l'épidémie de 2020, on fait face à un vrai retour à certaines de ces pratiques dans la société courante. C'est ce qu'en témoignent certaines modes sur les réseaux sociaux. Là, je parle de tout ce qui est cottagecore, tradwife ou survivaliste. L'opinion générale du mode de vie des Amish aurait certainement été différente il y a à peine 5 ans, là où pour certaines personnes, aujourd'hui, elle paraît peut-être plus sensée que jamais. Le peu d'argent nécessaire à leur vie pour qu'ils s'achètent les quelques produits et services qu'ils ne produisent pas eux-mêmes, comme je disais, est obtenu par la vente de leurs récoltes, les fruits de leur élevage, ou par le travail dans les entreprises Amish qu'on a cité plus tôt. Parmi les Amish, on retrouve notamment beaucoup de charpentiers et de maréchaux ferrants. Au-delà de cette autonomie, ils refusent aussi de dépendre de leur état. Ainsi, ils ne participent pas à la vie politique et refusent de s'associer au gouvernement de quelque façon que ce soit.
I feel like they have their politics inside, but like they don't want anything to do with the government. When I was born, like, we didn't have social security numbers.
Oh, wow.
Now, there are some orders that do, so I'm strictly speaking for my order. So my order to Sports Trooper, they don't vote, they don't have social security numbers, they don't have anything to do, they don't want anything to do with the government.
So I'm guessing the federal government is kind of laissez-faire with the Amish.
Yeah.
There's an untold rule of, you know, don't mess with us, we don't mess with you, some that kind of thing.
Yeah. But in terms of like govern inside the church, like then they have the bishops of the church and they govern over the church. They make their rules and they, you know, are like the head of it all.
Is there an internal democracy, or is it like a one-person rule?
It varies. Again, you know, there's the bishops and there are bishops in different parts of states in the church, and like my uncle was a bishop and he had a certain settlement, and then I could have another uncle in another settlement and he governed over that settlement.
S'ils se présentent au tribunal dans le cas où ils sont attaqués en justice, eux-mêmes n'utilisent pas ce genre de recours.
They don't do a lot with the court system. I'll give you an example. So when I was 13, my dad died unexpectedly. He got killed in a car crash by a drunk driver. And this driver did not have insurance. So there was no money. There was no money to cover the hospital bills. There was nothing that we could get from this person. Our neighbors that were not Amish, they wanted to go to court and fight this for us. Well, the Amish don't go to court unless they're summoned to court. They may have to go.
Okay.
So there have been some incidents for that. But there was nothing that we could really do because they weren't going to go fight in court and try to fight the justice system. And so he went to jail for 2 years, sentenced for 20, and he got out in 2. But what's really, really beautiful, though, is the Amish community comes together. They will come together and take care of each other. They'll put their differences aside and they come together. And the community outside of us that weren't Amish either, they raised money. They put all kinds of donation buckets out and they raised a lot of money. And that ended up covering for all of the hospital bills.
Ainsi, grandir Amish est assez similaire d'un enfant à un autre. Les journées sont rythmées par l'école jusqu'à l'âge de 14 ans, puis les garçons vont travailler dans l'entreprise familiale, ou parfois dans une autre entreprise Amish. Tandis que les filles, qui peuvent parfois travailler aussi pendant cette période, dédient la suite de leur adolescence aux tâches domestiques du foyer.
When people ask me like, how was your childhood and did you have fun? Absolutely. I have 18 siblings.
Wow.
Yes. Do we have our fights and arguments and bickering? Absolutely.
That's
but do we
crazy.
have fun? Absolutely.
Well, there's
we have
always someone to
fun.
hang out with.
I also rarely be alone, so there's
Yeah.
that too. But no, like first of all, we're hard workers. Our work was like Monday through Saturday. It was from dawn to dusk. You were doing work. There was no time for play unless you got your chores done in the evening and you had extra time and you're a little kid and you still had time to go out and run around and play with the wagon and do whatever. Then you got to do that. Our only rest day was on a Sunday because that was Sabbath. So we still had to feed the animals and do the chores, but then the rest of the day we got to play or we had to go to church.
Entre 18 et 20 ans, la majorité des communautés amish ont une année de césure pendant laquelle les enfants se confrontent au monde réel avant de décider de l'intégrer ou de revenir dans leur communauté afin de se faire baptiser et devenir un membre officiel de l'église amish. Et ce que je trouve perso vachement intéressant, c'est que plus de 80% des enfants choisissent de retourner dans leur communauté à la suite de cette année. Ensuite, ils se marient et vont fonder leur propre foyer, dans lequel ils auront en moyenne plus de 5 enfants. Cette espèce de repli nous amène à un souci, c'est que malgré le nombre important d'enfants dans les communautés, les familles sont assez peu nombreuses et cela occasionne une incidence plus élevée de troubles génétiques particuliers par rapport au reste du pays. Et l'accès à la médecine est, comment vous dire ça, particulier lui aussi.
In case of emergency, they will go to the hospital, they will go to the doctor. No, they're not really quick to go to the doctor if they get a cold or get sick or whatever. Like, we took care of it with home remedies. But for example, like when that accident happened with my dad, he had a blood clot on his brain, and they did surgery, and they're like, hey, he's probably never gonna wake up. Like, it was that bad. But he had a really, really good heart. So his heart was so strong, and it would have been a good donor heart, a very good donor. So the doctor wanted his heart so bad, but they don't do organ donations. So unfortunately, they could not take the heart. Women's health, for example, I did not know what a menstrual cycle was until I got it. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I gotta go to the hospital.
Right,
My mom's
yeah.
like, normal. I was like, what are you talking about? So there was no education around that until, it presented itself. In terms of education on sex, no. I have a twin sister, and I always laugh because at like 16 and a half is when we started dating. And I remember the day that was like our first time to like go to an event where all the dating people were, and the only words that my mom said to us was like, keep your clothes on. I was like, now I'm like, that was our sex ed talk? Like, what does that even mean?
Un autre problème lié à cette ostracisation, c'est qu'en l'absence d'arbitrage par la justice classique, celle-ci se fait au sein de la communauté, et en particulier par l'Église. Comme dans la plupart des communautés dans lesquelles c'est le cas, il y a une volonté de pratiquer la justice réparatrice, et donc de permettre à la fois de rester inséré dans la communauté et de fournir une réparation, plutôt que de se voir infliger une punition. Cependant, ça pose des questions morales, et on note parfois une volonté de protéger les membres de la communauté de la honte, et la communauté en elle-même d'une mauvaise image, plutôt que de protéger les réelles victimes.
The preachers and the bishops of the church, like, they want to handle all their conflict in private. They don't want anything with the outside world to come in and be like, let's just say, for example, there's sexual assault that happens. They still want to handle that internally. That's the one thing that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
And there have been people that have left and they went after their abusers, and the abusers ended up in jail. And I think that's necessary, because I don't think that's anything that you should be hiding. And if there was like there was a murder in the Amish community a few years ago.
Okay.
I remember when it happened. I was just reading about it again recently, and this guy had his wife killed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did
but
they...
he ended up in prison.
C'est un sujet complexe qui mériterait d'être plus exploré. Peu d'informations sont disponibles parce que les Amish ne partagent pas de compte-rendu de ces événements, et il faudrait clairement des professionnels pour analyser ça. Donc voilà, on va pas trop s'attarder sur ce sujet pour cette raison précise, mais on voulait quand même le mentionner dans les aspects marquants de ce mode de vie. Ces dernières décennies, les communautés ont tendance à évoluer et à s'ouvrir un peu plus au monde. Si la technologie est bannie du foyer, on la retrouve en revanche plus facilement dans les entreprises des Amish qui petit à petit ont introduit des machines afin de leur permettre d'être compétitifs, comme des ordinateurs sans internet utilisés pour du traitement de texte, ou encore des téléphones eux aussi dépourvus de connexion internet pour permettre aux clients de passer leurs commandes. Il est intéressant de noter que ces avancées n'ont perméabilisé et permis de faciliter que les aspects de la vie professionnelle. Autrement dit, et c'est là où je voulais en venir, ça ne concerne que les hommes en particulier. Les femmes, elles, n'ont pas de machine à laver moderne pour faciliter leur mode de vie à elles, par exemple.
Yeah, so the Amish are very structured. Like, they get up same time every morning, go milk the cows, feed the animals, take care of all that. They come in, everybody comes in together after that to have breakfast. And they all sit at the same table. Each child has their own spot at the table every single time. They all have breakfast together. And after breakfast, the guys usually go outside and they do the farming and whatever they have going on, whether it's winter, fall, summer, spring. and the women always take care of the dishes and cooking. And then the women do the sewing, and they do the canning, they do the gardening. And so it would be whatever season you're in, you're working on those things.
Okay.
And then everybody comes together for lunch. Same time.
Always very compartmentalized.
Yep.
Yeah.
After lunch, you know, they usually took a nap actually after lunch.
That's very European.
Take a nap after lunch and then go back to work and then all come together again for dinner. And then after dinner, it was the evening chores and finish up whatever the rest of the things that they were doing. And then it was bedtime.
Gotcha.
And that's the structure of the day.
Une autre valeur à laquelle on ne pense pas forcément, c'est le pacifisme. Les Amish refusent par exemple d'intégrer l'armée et, quand il était encore obligatoire, ils ont obtenu une dérogation exceptionnelle concernant le service militaire. Mais la valeur qui semble vraiment dominer est celle de la communauté. Ainsi, les gens ne participent peut-être pas à une échelle nationale aux caisses de sécurité sociale ou de retraite, mais en cas de pépin, tout le monde se rassemble pour aider les foyers dans le besoin, que ce soit pour payer une opération coûteuse ou pour aider à la reconstruction d'un bâtiment détruit par le feu.
You know, people always ask me like, what is the one thing that you miss or that you feel like is missing in the modern world? And that's the one thing I will say is community, because they have such strength in community and coming together. And so that's also why so many people don't leave, because the strength of the community is there. And then there are people that do leave like I did, but they can't handle not being with the community. So the bond of the family and the bond of the community is so strong that they can't fathom the thought of not being there. So it pulls them back in.
Alors avec toutes ces informations, on peut se demander, est-ce que c'est une secte ou est-ce que c'est pas une secte? Les règles sont décidées en groupe, mais on vit quand même en autarcie avec des enfants dans des écoles spéciales et qui n'ont de perspective d'avenir que celles déjà existantes au sein de la communauté et ne nécessitant pas de diplôme d'études supérieures. Les communautés ne participent pas à la vie politique, ne s'intègrent pas au système de l'État, ne travaillent que dans des entreprises détenues par leurs pairs, font leur propre justice, n'ont pas accès ni d'intérêt pour l'actualité. Et d'ailleurs c'est marrant parce que leur seul journal est un journal Amish, évidemment, qui sert surtout à prendre connaissance des récents mariages, naissances et décès, avec quelques articles rédigés par des membres des différentes communautés composés d'anecdotes et d'informations sur la météo de telle ou telle région, de diverses célébrations et de l'état de l'agriculture locale. Et en même temps, les Amish évoluent petit à petit en faisant des concessions sur certains sujets. Ils refusent pas de discuter avec les gens de l'extérieur et surtout ils ne font pas de recrutement, ce qui est quand même certainement le point le plus important de beaucoup de sectes. Plus que ça, il est même très rare que des personnes deviennent Amish au cours de leur vie, à la fois parce que comprendre et embrasser pleinement ce mode de vie et cette religion sans avoir grandi dedans n'est pas forcément évident pour la majorité des gens, mais aussi parce que les Amish restent plutôt méfiants des gens cherchant à intégrer leur communauté.
Visiting the Amish, it really depends on the person, the family, what they think that the person's trying to get. So like you can become friends with Amish people, but there are some things that they will never share with anybody that's not from the Amish. Internal things, internal rules of the church, internal doings. There are things that they will always keep private. Someone to become Amish,
do people join?
Very difficult. There was a guy named David Johnson when I was still there that tried to become Amish. He tried different church districts to become Amish, and the way that he wanted to become Amish is join the church and become a member of the church. And there's this whole thing every summer that they do where if you're at that age between 18 and 20, you're kind of expected to become a member of the church. But they take all summer to they have this like ritual every Sunday where the kids that are going to get baptized in the fall to become a member, they have to go through this whole step-by-step process by following the preachers to a different room every Sunday to like start learning about what the church rules are and stuff like that. Also to show that you're committed to become a member and follow the rules. So he would do that. He was committed. He was committed. And he would always make it as far as right before baptism. And then they would turn him away and say, we can't baptize you. And I have my theories about it, but when he tried to enter and he tried to join, he didn't know that music wasn't allowed. So they're like, well, you need to give up a lot of things. someone saw him with music, and they're like, you can't have music if you want to be Amish. And so he took it to the extreme. Someone saw him in town, like running down the street, and there's like music playing somewhere, and he's like running down the street with like covering his ears because he's like, I can't listen to music. But he never made it.
Wow.
He never made it in.
Do you know what his story was? Whoa.
You know what's interesting? I have a pretty large audience on TikTok, and I was live on TikTok one time, and he ended up in my chat, in my TikTok live, and I was like,
that's crazy.
This is wild. So like we had this whole conversation, and he's, you know, commenting on my stuff, and I was like, wait, you're the David Johnson? And he's like asking me about all these different districts of the Amish. He knew exactly who the bishops were, all of it.
Tried them all.
And I was like, this is wild. But now he's just like living off the grid as a homesteader with a wife and kids.
Yeah, he settled for the next best thing.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, if I can't be Amish, I will be as close as I can be.
We have Amish at home.
D'ailleurs, les plus conservateurs d'entre eux n'aiment pas être photographiés ni filmés, et le peu de documentaires dans lesquels ils apparaissent ont souvent beaucoup de difficultés à être acceptés dans leur foyer et doivent tout de même flouter leur visage car ils considèrent ce genre de pratique comme des vanités inutiles. Ainsi, vous ne trouverez pas de photos de famille ni de portraits sur les murs des maisons Amish. En revanche, pour sortir de la communauté, c'est une autre histoire. Si c'est pas interdit par la communauté, qui offre même souvent une opportunité de sortie pendant l'année précédant le baptême, autour des 20 ans, la pression de l'église, de la famille et de la communauté est lourde. Surtout que ce sont en général les seules personnes que la personne Amish qui se questionne connaît vraiment. Sortir de la communauté revient donc à sortir du seul monde que l'on connaît réellement, sauf si on a un membre de la famille ou un proche qui a déjà quitté la communauté chez qui on peut se réfugier. En revanche, après le baptême, quitter la communauté est plutôt vécu comme une trahison. Et c'est notamment le cas de mon invitée d'aujourd'hui. Elle nous a parlé de sa première tentative de sortie, puis de celle qui a scellé son départ de la communauté Amish, et c'est vraiment digne d'un film policier, je vous laisse l'apprécier.
So I'm going to speak for my story. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. It's to paint a picture like the Schwarzentrooper Amish is difficult. That was 20 years ago. In today's age, it's a little bit easier than what it used to be because there's a lot of us that have left and they have a little bit more access to calling someone and saying, hey, I want to leave. I have a twin sister, and when her and I were 17, we ran away together. We were the first in the entire 19 kids to ever do that. Of course, I was the instigator. I was like, I want to run away.
Sounds like a novel.
and we were really close at that point in time. And she's like, great, I'll go with you. So we ran away, but we were only gone for 2 days. And we ended up at a cousin's house, like a cousin of ours that had left a few years before. And the second day that we had left, my cousin's at work. So it's just her and I there. We're like eating, we're watching TV, we're listening to music, like doing all the things you're not allowed to do when you're at home. And the phone rings, and this was back when home phones were still a thing. And she's in the kitchen and I'm in the living room. We both pick it up at the same time, but she starts talking first, but I can hear her. So I'm like, I'm just gonna listen to this entire conversation.
Yeah.
It was one of our brothers. He found out, well, obviously we were gone, and they suspected that's where we are, or he found out that's where we are. Called the house. By the end of that conversation, my sister says to him, you have to come pick us up tonight. I can't do this. Because they mourn you as if you died. So his whole story was
rough.
like, yeah, so his whole thing was like, this is what mom is going through. Like, it's really, really bad at home. Everybody's super sad. They're all crying, you know, all that stuff. And so my twin was like, I can't do this. Like, we have to go back. I mean, my heart just like sank to my feet because I thought I was out for good. I was also 17, so I was technically underage. So they came back that night in their horse and buggy and picked us up and went back home, and I was so devastated. Like, I told her the next day, I was like, I'm not staying. Like, I will leave again. And she's like, no, I'll leave again too, but she's still there, and she has 11 kids. That was the first part of us wanting or trying to leave. It took me 2 years from that time until I finally did leave, knowing that entire time that I would want to leave at some point in time. But in those 2 years, I started dating a guy from New York, and we were in a long distance relationship. My twin and I got baptized into the church. And all of those things, even though I was going through those steps because that's what was expected, because you can't get married unless you're a member of the church.
Okay.
So I went through those steps because that's what was expected. But the entire time I couldn't see myself there.
And because you escaped a first time, you kind of had a preview of everything that was going to be on your shoulders the day of when you decide you're actually done with this.
I felt pretty stuck because I was like, I know I'm not supposed to be here and I don't want to be here, but I don't know how I'm going to leave. And second, I knew that my twin was probably not going to leave because she was in a pretty serious relationship and they had already planned to get married.
Yeah.
So fast forward when I'm 19, I'm a member of the church, and I am dating this guy from New York, and we write letters to each other. So this is my process of leaving. I'm working at my oldest sister's house as a hired maid, and it's my turn to deliver a letter to my boyfriend. So I walk up the street, I open up the mailbox to put this letter in there, and when I open up the mailbox, there's a note in there that has his handwriting on it, but there's no address. And I was like, how is there a note in this mailbox and there's no address? He's in New York. I'm in Ohio. And I open up the note and it said, my sister and I and her boyfriend drove down from New York yesterday and we ran away from the Amish. And mind you, we had never talked about leaving, ever.
Wow.
Didn't even know it was on his radar.
Was he aware that you had escaped
Before?
a couple years prior? Yeah. Okay. So he knew. You kind of
he
had that in you.
He probably had, like, you know, but we just never had that conversation. And he's like, if you want to come, we'll come by tonight at 10 p.m. and we'll pick you up. If you don't want to come, I'll come by another time and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Basically, like, I'm leaving whether you're...
It feels like he knew.
Yeah, I think... I mean, I literally, like, just snapped my finger in 2 seconds and I was like, I'm leaving. Like, I knew that was my way out, but I couldn't tell anybody. So you can't tell anybody because the chances are very high there will be an intervention. So I waited until nighttime until everybody else, like, went to bed. And I went upstairs and I was the only person that was sleeping on the 3rd floor. So there's 3 stories there. And I go upstairs to pretend like I was going to bed, but as soon as I got into my room, I, like, ripped the covering off my head. I started taking off some of my clothes that I didn't want to take. And I wrote a note for my mother. And I said, it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with anybody here, but I have to go. And I had $20. I had a flashlight. My boyfriend was already up on the hill, like, flashing that he was up there. So I, like, flashed back. I'm coming. I go over to the window. I climb out onto the roof. And there's a dog underneath on the porch. And he starts barking like crazy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm caught. Like, he wouldn't stop barking. And you have all these things going through your head, like, what if they hear you? What if they know what you're thinking? Like, everything, because you're so afraid. And finally, my brother-in-law opened the door below me, and he, like, yelled at the dog, and so, like, the dog ran away down to the barn, and he, like, left me alone. So after that calmed down, I climb out onto the roof, and this is, like, a 15-foot roof. I sit on that roof for about 30 minutes, like, contemplating, like, how am I going to jump off this roof and not break a bone? Because if I break a bone,
no, you're done.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, I will look like the biggest fool in the community. They have, like, this paper in the Amish community called The Budget, and that's where all their news is and gossip, and I'm like, I'm gonna be the news of the budget. Like,
I'm gonna be Amish gossip of the day.
Yep. So what I finally did is I climbed out to the edge of the roof, and I just, like, crouched down, and I learned on the farm that cats never break a bone when they jump or fall, and I learned why that is, and it's because they keep every single limb in their body just loose and limp when they jump or fall.
Okay.
They could drop 40 feet and they just get up and walk away.
So you did a cat jump.
So I jumped like a cat, and I ran around like 4 buildings to get up to the hill where my boyfriend was.
And then he found you.
And yeah, and then I met up with him, and
Wow.
we drove off to the sunset.
That's an amazingly visual story. Wow.
Yeah.
And what happened immediately after? Like the next couple of days? Because they must have figured out by then that you escaped.
Oh man, it's an adrenaline. Like, people always ask, like, what did you do when you got into the truck?
Yeah,
Like,
what do you do?
We screamed. Like, we were just like, we're free. And for the first time, we could listen to music and not have to hide, walk into a room and turn on the light switch. I had my first shower at 19 because we didn't have showers. It's like, this is amazing.
This is great.
I remember going to get my hair cut like a few days after I left, and this lady was familiar with Amish people, and a friend of mine took me, and she was like, my hair was like all the way down, like it had never been cut. So
Yeah,
it was,
she
like,
knew.
super long. She's like, how short do you want your hair? And I was like, shoulders. And she looked at me, she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. My haircut.
For the first time.
I think it was like 6 months or so before I went back the first time, and then it took her about 2 years to come around and eventually just be like, you know what,
Yeah.
you're a good kid, I still love you, I may not agree with you leaving and doing what you're doing, but I still want to see you. So she made it very clear to me, and I have 3 younger siblings that left after I did, and she made it very clear to us that she never wants anything to come between us to the point where we can't come see her.
Alors je vous le redemande, d'après vous, secte ou pas? Si certains aspects relèvent clairement de la dérive sectaire, il semble difficile de qualifier l'entièreté de ces communautés, qui vivent chacune avec leurs propres règles, de secte. Mais je veux bien vos avis en commentaire, parce qu'il n'y a sans doute pas une seule bonne réponse à cette question. Et si vous aimez ce genre d'histoire, je vous conseille cette vidéo qui parle d'une youtubeuse qui a créé sa propre secte.